Okay, everyone, we might get started. And first of all, so I'm Michelle Canavan. I'm a geriatrician and I've been involved with the Reach Network. And just to recap for anyone who's newly joining us today, this is a virtual network, a community of practice for healthcare professionals working outside of major urban centres. So the focus on rural education and the whole importance of connected health. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping first, and then we'll introduce our speaker. With Professor Dara Byrne here today, so we're delighted to talk about simulation and its context within the Reach Network. Is my slide moving on? Sorry now. Yeah. So the whole rationale for this network really is just that, the city health ecosystems are kind of different to the regional health ecosystems, and those of us who work in Model 2, 3 hospitals in the community with rural GP practices know this, and things are slightly different. We have to do things in a slightly different way. That we need to promote enhanced clinical generalism, and that's one of the core parts of this. And then use kind of, interconnectedness and methods that help us to do that. And I suppose we're just trying to use this network as a forum for this, and we've had very interesting talks so far. This is the sixth Reach Network event, and the last one of this academic year. And we'd be really keen to get your feedback on how you felt the Reach network has gone so far, maybe what topics you might like to think about in the next academic year. And we will hope to get it back going up in September, probably initially with an in-person event if possible. But we will be doing these webinars at the lunchtime slot as well. But we'll keep you up to date on those, and there'll be emails going out after this. And we'll send a recap of what's been talked about. We have a YouTube channel with all our previous speakers, which is useful for people to go back if they haven't been able to. We know it's difficult to get into all these meetings, so that's available. So just for today, we have a presentation usually for about 40 minutes. We love interaction and questions. If you can put on your camera when you're asking a question, or put it in the chat and then put your camera on when we have the chance to go through the questions. But keep your microphone muted in the meantime, if you don't mind. We do have CPD points available for this. So we have a hospital buddy code for the hospital systems here. And there's CPD for MyCGP. It's that time of year when everyone's getting their CPD together. So important to think about it. And obviously just with the talkers, so things change obviously in clinical scenarios and stuff like that. So the information is accurate at the time, obviously, but it doesn't replace clinical guidelines and shouldn't be used as such. So without further ado from me, I just want to really, we're delighted to have Professor Dara Byrne, who is going to speak today on simulation to improve and integrate. And she has over 25 years experience in high quality simulation based interprofessional activities. And I think really over the last few years has looked at, harnessing that collaborative simulation to support change in healthcare, quality improvement, and particularly around integration of teams, how we work as processes together. And I think this is really relevant in rural settings where we may have to do things virtually. We may have to look at how teams work in various different places. And working on those team dynamics and health improvement in these structures. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce her and thank her again for giving us her time. Please have a think about your questions during the thing and post them up as we're going along, and we'll try and get through them then at the end. I'm sure Dara will have no problem with answering the questions. So thanks a million, Dara.
Thank you.
Just lastly about the feedback form via the chat if you can at the end, and I'll stop talking now and stop sharing.
Okay. Yes, I'm going to now try and share.
Oh, is that stopping? I have stopped sharing, but it's not.
It's off, Michelle. It's fine.
Is it gone? Good. Sorry, it's still on my screen.
Hard to see what's on and what's off. Okay, so I just need to put this on. Is that on full screen?
That's perfect, Dara. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Okay. So, thanks very much to Michelle for the intro, and thanks to Robert for the invitation. I'm conscious that we've gone from very pink slides to very blue and yellow slides, but anyway, they're the organizations that we work in. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about my favorite topic, obviously SIM, but just to talk about it, as Michelle says, in the context of the Reach network, because I do think that there's some synergies. Wait, let's see, how do I move slides on? Maybe the corner there. Is it moving? Okay, So rather than just kind of give an overarching talk about SIM, I did some stalking of the Reach network over the last couple of weeks, and here's what I discovered. The focus is obviously very specific, all professions, but that group working across primary, integrated and secondary care, and particularly Model 2 and Model 3 hospitals, and focusing on interventions that address the primary, integrated, secondary care interface, which is critical for efficient and safe patient care. And then makes the point that, there is a need for different learning and solutions in this space. And so I'm kind of pleased with all of that, because that really feeds into what I get from that is that this is all about understanding how work is done versus work as imagined. So I think in healthcare, we have a great tendency to make decisions on how things are done and apply those as a blanket across every setting. And obviously things are changing and have changed very dramatically and will continue to do so. So when I was reading all about you, I was thinking that this is about teams and how teams work, and careful thought about that is now required, and not just in terms of team members, because we have new team members all of the time. But some of those team members are in different roles. We have advanced practice. We absolutely have new ways of working, be it digitally or in terms of who we communicate with. But there's also things to consider around the process and the integration. So careful thought about, what does the continuity of care now look like? It's quite different, because I think the community and treating people at home and in different settings has come to the fore. Those transitions are very different. We have new pathways and new processes and new ways of sharing information. So we do need to understand it before we launch into, well, here's what we're going to do to improve it, or here's what we're going to do to educate people in that space. And I do agree that tailored education interventions are required. And I've been banging that drum for a while, and I'm going to do some more today. Because we need to be careful that what we're designing as education, and particularly if they're education interventions, are relevant to our current practice. So thankfully, modern healthcare simulation addresses all of these issues. And I think, I'm just curious as to where you think in your head SIM fits in these kind of two different settings. So the first one I'm going to talk about towards the end, but that's where I think most people associate SIM. It sits in this kind of education and training space. We have a set of competencies that we have to achieve, and so SIM can help us with some of those. Unfortunately, sometimes it is used for knowledge. I would say that's a very expensive way to teach people things. We are probably comfortable with its use for teaching technical, procedural type of skills, and maybe non-technical. We all know the dreaded OSCE and the communication skills. And then some of us may be using it for attitudes and behaviors, a little bit of teamwork, and again, a bit of leadership and decision making. But actually, probably where is most interesting, I think, in your space at the moment is this translational simulation space. And that's a term that really describes simulation for systems and improvement. And it's a slightly different way of looking at how SIM is used, but it has quite a different methodology. And in translational simulation, we're targeting not a competency. So we're not in the simulator or doing simulation to give the learners feedback. We're in the simulator to get feedback from the learners or from the participants. And that's quite different. So we're targeting a specific need. And that need is in the way we do business in healthcare. And we use simulation to explore and improve that together. And you can use it just purely for exploration, just having a look, well, how do we do business? Or you can say, okay, that's not so good, let's intervene. And you can do that with simulation. So that's, it is a bit of a shift. And I think people struggle with it when they're in the simulator and somebody asks them for feedback, how did the system, how did the equipment, how did your colleagues help you to get your job done today? That can be a bit of a shocker to people, but that's really where we want to be. And how we do business is complex. So this is a visual of how complex healthcare is. And this comes from human factors. And I think SIM in the last maybe 5 years has moved out of the pure education space into this other disciplines and other science spaces. So we now are very closely aligned with human factor science, quality improvement, change management, design thinking, leadership, systems thinking. And that's where SIM fits and where it works best. And this is a human factors approach, and it's a socio-technical model of healthcare, and it just brings you into kind of thinking about, okay, there's the patient and there's me in there as an individual, and there's my team, and my team means different things to different people and is of different sizes and looks very different today than it did even 5 years ago. But there's all these other things that influence what outcomes and impact us and impact the patient. And we need to think about those. And so when you're designing an intervention or you're teaching, are you including these things, or are you very focused on teaching the individual? Because if you are, that's not going to work. And so that's the human factors kind of lens. And we use a lot of human factors approaches to designing simulation now. The other thing that we use a lot of is quality improvement, and it's very closely aligned, Sim. And the point being that, you saw that picture of the socio-technical models. Healthcare is a complex system. And if you move any piece, if you make a change to how an individual behaves or the workforce or the equipment, if a new piece of equipment comes in, a new process, everything else shifts. So that's very complex. And to make change and improve in that setting is incredibly difficult. And this is coming from quality improvement science around Deming's profound system of knowledge, where he says, look, it's very difficult to make changes if something is complex, because you've got a lot of people in there and you've got a lot of knowledge in the system, and you've got a lot of variation. So it's not like McDonald's, where it doesn't matter where I am in the world, I can ask for a Big Mac or Le Big Mac and I will get the same product. It's much more complex than that, and the variability is massive. And so, following on from that, we use this continuous cycle of improvement to improve. You'll all be familiar with kind of PDSA cycles, define, design, deliver, and go back and do it all again. And simulation, you can see from the yellow, really fits into that process. So we can look at things, we can think about them, we can try out a design. If it doesn't work, we go back again. But I mean, the key to it is that it is continuous. And this is another area that SIM is very closely aligned to, and it is design thinking. And I like this double diamond of design. The problem is there in the center at the intersection of the two diamonds. And my experience of working with healthcare workers is that they go straight in there to the problem and they move into the green diamond. Let's develop a new protocol. Let's bring in a new way of communicating. Let's buy a new piece of equipment, and away we go. But actually, they need to back it up and get into the blue diamond and think about, like, what are we doing that works? How do we know that works? Who else is doing it? Is there something we can learn from? So, throwing the baby out with the bathwater needs to stop. And SIM, again, helps us to understand our new processes. And I think the Model 3, Model 2 hospitals, the community practice, home care, and GP practice has changed hugely. And the last one that it's very closely aligned to, and I am going to talk a little bit about this. I mean, you probably didn't bargain for quite so much philosophy and thinking, but this is how it kind of works. And I guess this is Senge's 5 disciplines, and it's really about systems thinking, about thinking of something as a whole, as opposed to just you. Now, these are the 5 disciplines. If you look at the top one, personal mastery is, like, it's so relevant. It's saying, well, where are we and where do we want to get to and how do we get there? But you have to define where you are first. Mental models is trying to get everybody to drop the assumptions, the sort of biases we hold about each other in different places and in different professions. And I see quite a lot of that. The shared vision, so, define what you want to do and where you want to get to. And then the 2 big ones that are very closely linked to SIM are team learning and systems thinking. And team learning, I am going to talk about because the teams are different and it's key to what you guys do. It's about how we speak to each other, how we collaborate, and how we look for input from every team member. And systems thinking is key, which is big thinking, thinking kind of outside the box and understanding the whole. And again, Senge describes 3, kind of learning disabilities that we have around why don't we think big. And number 1, I think, is that thing around I am my position. So I represent myself, and we talk about our professional identities and our jobs and how, you know, important they are to us. But if you continue to hold that stance all of the time, it's very difficult to see things from other people's perspective. So that's described as a learning disability, which is probably an unfortunate term and is a bit out of date, but it is quite it's quite descriptive. And the other one is that an inability to see the impact of what you do if the cause and effect are very distant in time. So we make changes, and we never really think. I think I work for the HSE, and I'm not dissing them, but I do think they're very good at making very short-term decisions and not thinking, well, you know, down the line, where will we be with that? What is the impact in that? And the third one is being reactive all of the time, as opposed to proactive. So that those things, even though they really are nothing to do with healthcare, when this came out many years ago, to me it really resonates, and it is simulation really can explore those two areas of team learning and systems thinking. So, you know, we're trying to get our organization to learn how we do business, and an organization really doesn't learn; it learns through its teams. So if we can get the team piece right, we'll probably be making some progress. So I want to look a little bit at systems thinking and a little bit of team learning. So systems thinking and that translational simulation are very closely linked because of this, because it allows us to look and to see what's happening. And that's the key to it. And this is one of my favorite pictures, is an old picture now, which is a simulation that for me is the simulation version of the socio-technical model of healthcare. So you can see that, you know, the patient is there in the center somewhere. I mean, it's the tiny little baby in there. But you can see what surrounds that tiny baby. The mother, the father are there, but there's an individual, you know, midwife, an obstetrician, there's an obstetric team, there's an anesthetic team, there's a neonatal team, there's a theater team. There's 4 teams in that picture. They're trying to handle equipment. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they've had a complicated or a flat baby delivery an hour or 2 before this. Who knows? Who knows what's going on at home with these people? And who knows whether they get on? Who knows whether there's a blame culture in this organization, so they feel under pressure? And so all of these things, you know, impact on how the outcome for that patient and that mom and the baby. So, you know, these shots are just taken from inside a simulation where we're just looking. That's all. And here you've got a transfer of a little baby, you know, moving from a hospital to a center of excellence. So say it's from a peripheral hospital to a pediatric center, and the baby's intubated and being parceled off. But you can see here that, you know, the complexity of that move across, even up from one trolley to the other, is huge. And you can see where there's potential for error in it. And you can see whether, you know, communication, silence, how are those things used? How is that coordinated? And what you can do in sim is you can run that, and then you can look at it, and you can stand around and scribble on a piece of paper and say, you know what, it might be better if I was the lead and I said do A, B, and C, or it might be better if there was a checklist that I read out, and then you can go back and do it again. And this is understanding the system and understanding by just looking. This is a couple of shots. Now, again, these are just shots taken at a moment in time, but they're of interest. So this is a sepsis, pediatric sepsis, with the team around the child. And one of the things that we get asked, and we have a project running on it at the moment in the National Simulation Office, is why is the uptake and the use of the national sepsis guidelines, why is it so low? Now, that's a very strange metric for me, but it is their metric. And again, it brings into my mind, you know, be careful what you're measuring, because that often drives performance. But anyway, so this is a metric they have in their audit, the completion of this document and how we're using it. So, you know, if you look here at this picture, again, one shot in time, I'm not sure what that sepsis protocol is doing for the care of that child, because it seems to be taking people away from the care. And if we play it forward, so the child deteriorates here, and now we've got the anesthetic anaesthetists in, and we've got the infectious diseases people in, but look at where the nursing staff are. So, you know, what is driving the completion of the form? It's just bizarre to me. So this is the sort of thing that we need to look at. And is it culture that's driving it? Is it that the form is so complex that it takes 2 hours to fill out? Is it actually improving the outcome of that child? I don't know. So before you go changing the form and bringing in a new protocol, which is what has happened, we have new guidelines, perhaps you should look at how people are handling what they currently have. And this is a stroke sim. And again, we've been asked, you know, can you shorten the door to needle time? And like the answer is, well, maybe you can, I don't know, but let's have a look at it. And if you look here, and what's interesting in this, and this is what happens in Model 3 hospitals who don't have a dedicated stroke team, it's the medical team that are coming down. And so the medical team come down to the ED team. But when you look at this one snapshot in time, you can see that the teams aren't working together. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe it isn't, you know, the default is, well, they're not following the protocol or they don't understand. I think people do understand, and people follow the protocol if it's a good one and easy to use. So again, this may be a team working, it may be a communication, it may be a shared mental model issue rather than just the default of, well, you all need to learn a bit more about stroke. And here's one that Michelle will be familiar with. This is the integrated care model for the older persons. And this is the frailty team. And again, we were just looking like what actually happens here when an older man comes in and is seen by frailty, whose job it is to try and keep this man out of hospital, which they do. He gets to go home, and we can sim the next day, or when the community team, older persons team, gets the referral and starts making decisions about him. But you can start to look at, well, what happens if it's a Friday and it's 3 o'clock? Can he go home? Who's around on a Saturday, Sunday? And what happens if, you know, it's an electronic transfer of the data, but it fails in some way? Or what happens if the data is inaccurate? Or what happens if he goes home and he drives his car and he crashes it into, you know, all of these what ifs can be discussed and looked at through simulation. So the second thing is this team learning and the art, I suppose, of dialogue and how we link those two in simulation and translational simulation. And I think this is a really powerful statement. And my regret is that this is not mine, but this is actually coming from the House of Lords in the UK in November 2025, when they made the statement that healthcare transformation is reliant on teams working together. And so they took a very serious look at how the changes in the NHS, or what was the NHS, would be implemented if there wasn't a focus on interprofessional education and team learning. And I think the same applies here. You know, we have to understand that teams mean different things. They look very different and they work in different ways. But what simulation can do is, if you can get a team together, is it can do this, it can slow your thinking down. So a lot of times, you know, our decisions are made based on, usually based on speed and time and pressure. But in a simulator, you can do all of that, but then you can sit down and you can slow the thinking down. And once you do that and you get input from multiple professions and multiple interest holders, you start to innovate and you start to see things much more clearly. And this is from a Nixon paper on translational simulation. And this is a framework they developed as to how you design and think about translational simulation. And they have 3 parts. It's called the input, process, output framework. And the input is, you know, asking you, well, what are you actually trying to do here? But if you look at the process piece, and this is something that's very different to how we function as educators, it's all about, you know, who do you want to be part of this? Who's going to input into it? Who's going to be in the room? Who has a voice? Because that is going to determine the design and the impact and the effectiveness of it. And these are screenshots from some of those sims you saw in the last few slides. So in the integrated care model for the older persons, if you look at who's in the room here so that we can discuss it, you know, you've got Orla Healy from QPS, you've got Michelle, you've got the hospital management, you've got older people at the back, you've got GP, you have Colm Henry, whose business it is. You've got Emer Ahern, who is the national lead. You've got, you know, everybody's in this room, so all professions. So at least we can have a conversation. And the people who work in the community with older people are also in the room. So this is really important, this dialogue piece. And Ruth won't mind me showing this, I hope. But dialogue is very different to discussion. And I think as healthcare professionals, we're really good at discussing things. We discuss them all the time. But if you're discussing something, you are essentially trying to win. Do you think about that? Right? I'm discussing it with you, but I want to win. My opinion wants to win. And that's important for teaching, and I get it. But it is not particularly useful when you're trying to bring teams together and you're trying to change and you're trying to improve team learning. What you want is dialogue, which is different, where you hold your assumptions and you have an open conversation and everybody's voice is equal and you're not trying to win. So, you know, and this comes back to, I think people think about debriefing in simulation. That's where we have dialogue and there is a skill to it. And there's a bit of a sort of a woo-woo around it. It isn't particularly difficult to do, but because it's all about listening. And actually, it's not the debriefing that's difficult. It's very hard for us to listen. And the second piece that's critical in debriefing is that you ask the right question. So I suppose it begs the question, what's the right question? You know, it's an open question is what you're trying to. But it is about listening. What is important to get the right question and to get the dialogue going is that the environment feels safe. And again, this is not just about simulation. The environment where we work should feel safe. There should be psychological safety in your team, in your unit, in your practice, wherever you are. And it doesn't have to be about speaking up or whistleblowing. It can be at the very lower end there of the triangle, which is inclusion safety, which is where a new team member comes in, and our teams are changing all the time. In fact, it's very rare now to get, you know, a native team. The team in week 1 is different to the team in week 2. So does everybody feel accepted in the team? And that's in clinical practice. And if that is the case, then your team is safer because they perform better. And because everybody has a shared mental model. So if you have taken the time to induct somebody into your team and to value them as a member of your team, then your team will be safer. And the next level up is where each member of the team can say, I don't know, or I made a mistake. And if you have that in your team, then your team is safer and they perform better. And then it goes up to the higher level where you start to be able to speak up. So I think the psychological safety piece is something that we can train in the simulator, but it must translate out into practice. And you can get to a point with your dialogue where people will speak freely, emotion and all, warts and all, and we're able to discuss it and handle it. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the places that, I suppose, and have the conversations that we would never normally have, certainly not in meetings or on Teams or on Zoom. And so I think, you know, in terms of, you know, what I read about the REACH and what I understand about the integrated care model is that we really need to know what is the work done or the work to be done and how do we educate and how do we improve in that space. And I think it is that translational sim that can help. So just to have a last look then at the more traditional, I guess, type of sim, and it's artificial to separate them because we're learning all the time and educating all the time. And actually we are, unbeknownst to ourselves, improving all of the time. So they are linked. But if you go back to the very traditional use of sim around education and training for knowledge, skills, and attitudes, I mean, again, a lot of what we do is very focused on the individual, or it's focused on what I call our own tribe. So people will say, you know, oh, we do interprofessional sim. And I'll say, well, do you? And say, well, we do it in the ED and everybody's involved. And I'm like, well, are they? Because they're not participating and people not understanding your role and not having your voice and being in the sim, that's not interprofessional simulation. So, you know, and doing it with your own tribe is really not what we're talking about either. It needs to be with the wider system. But there is value in some of this. And I think for teaching technical and non-technical skills in undergraduate and postgraduate settings, we can use it. So I just want to have a quick show you some of the things that we are doing in that space. So this, again, this is looking back at the translational sim framework of the input, process, output. But what's really important, it does apply to the education setting also, because the input, why are you doing it is the critical piece when you are thinking about what are we trying to teach people. Is it relevant? Is anybody else doing it, and should they be part of our gang when we're trying to teach this? And when it comes to SIM, the question we always ask, well, is SIM really necessary to do this? Could it be done any other way? So asking yourself what's the need becomes absolutely critical in simulation when you're designing it for education. And when we design, I think people will be familiar with this. This is an instructional design model for education. And when you start out to design a program, the very first thing you should ask yourself is, why are we doing this? What is the need? And I think we're really bad at that, because it sometimes falls into, well, it's in the curriculum. There's a list of things and a list of learning objectives, and sometimes a list of graduate outcomes and things that we have to sign off on. But actually, are they even relevant? And are we even doing them? And are we using the right methodology? So this pushback into what are you at is really important for SIM. So, what is the need? And these are the 13 causes of harm from the National Patient Safety Strategy. Is that where you start? Is that what is causing the most harm, and therefore they should be the things we're teaching? I don't know. I'm interested. I like this is from the strategy, and I like this because it's not just a list of clinical topics. It has verbs, and it has kind of targets: prevention and management, recognizing, reducing, improving, ensuring. So in some ways they may be the places, and I think we naturally fall into these. We do a lot of sepsis training and things like that. But again, this is an idea of, well, what is the need? And when it comes to the need, the next thing is, are you teaching it the right way? And I put this up because this is lumbar puncture, but the gold standard is this. So, procedural skills should be taught under ultrasound mapping or guidance, and yet we persist not doing that for multiple reasons. And I get it, and Sim has explained to me why we do it. But you can see that the simulators are fully set up for ultrasound. All of the simulators are now ultrasound compatible. It can be very hard to get a simulator that is not ultrasound compatible, and yet we persist with it. So is the skill relevant when you're teaching it? And, why are you teaching it? Is it because it is in your curriculum and we haven't changed our curriculum in 20 years? Or is there a genuine need? And I think this is a great example. This is ultrasound guided PICC line insertion. And the reason that this program was developed was not because it was on somebody's curriculum. It was a program that was developed for nursing. And the need was that on a Friday, patients in a hospital were not getting their PICC lines inserted because the list for radiology was too long. And so they would wait all weekend with maybe, an intern trying to get peripheral access and destroying their veins, and they wouldn't get their antibiotics. And so the need was, this is a patient safety issue. And so we said, okay, well, we'll train up the nurses to do it. So again, is that the reason you're doing it? Is another reason that you're doing it because it's an area that is continuously flagging as an area for error or risk. And hyperkalemia continues to be very high on the risk register in terms of nationally. And it's because the protocol, I think, keeps changing and it's different. And what we did when we looked at this in the simulator, we said, okay, let's just look at it, is instead of just looking at it in the Model 4 hospital, we looked at it in 4 different areas. So what happens if hyperkalemia, if it comes back in your GP practice, that's the result. What happens if it happens in your outpatients? What happens if it's in the ED? And what happens if it's in the ward? And all of those things require a different approach. So one size doesn't fit all. And again, these are the things we need to think about. And you can come up with solutions. And here we have the multi-professional team coming up with a solution to the challenge that is hyperkalemia. Some of the programs that we are developing have been very largely driven, this is at a national level, by that question, what is the need? And so we're developing a national skills and simulation induction program for international medical graduates. And I'm conscious that this is something that is very close to the heart of Model 3 hospitals, because that's where the majority of these graduates go. And, this program hasn't been in place before, and you wonder why. But it is an absolute gap in our armamentarium of safety. So the need is, there's 1,600 new entrants to the healthcare system every year. It's risky for people to come in and not be inducted onto the clinical site as to how we do business. There is a well-being element, and we know that from international data that tells us that international graduates spend a lot of time worrying that they will end up in front of the medical council because they've done something wrong. And we've taken evidence from the UK and others to create the content, including international medical graduates themselves. And so there's 4 modules developed, which are targeting core procedural skills, core communication, immersion in clinical practice in Ireland and in your hospital, and safe prescribing. And all of the content for that is designed as to be modularized, to be generalizable and transferable across professions and sites with minimum modification. The key to it is standardizing it, and it's standardized across 16 clinical sites, and we've done that by providing guides, support, and sharing. Obviously, it has to be shaped to within each hospital, but the delivery of it is standardized and made it all reasonably user-friendly by using things like trigger videos, so very short videos of people telling a story, and we can have a conversation around it using flashcards, or again, it's not all about having the mannequin and having a lot of equipment. This is called VEMS, which is visually enhanced mental simulation, where the case is created and the discussion or dialogue happens about that case, and you can run a case type of scenario, have all sorts of questions about the clinical management of it, but also questions like, well, what happens when it's time to go home? Has the multidisciplinary team been involved, and how do I contact them? So we're developing this kind of content, and we're also talking to the ICGP around, could we use this for, conversations around, yes, something happens, there's an emergency in a GP practice, that's only one part of it. What happens afterwards, the communication with family, et cetera, et cetera. So VEMS is a very powerful way actually to use simulation to teach particular communication and team-based skills. The second one is POCUS, Train the Trainer. So it's not a POCUS course, it is a POCUS course for trainers. And the need was that there is a change in practice, and it is now standard for skills and for some diagnostics, but for skills to use ultrasound. And the pressure point we discovered around POCUS is the mentoring and the skill acquisition. So lots of people were going to the UK to get educated, but when they came back and needed one-to-one mentoring and skill acquisition, the mentor wasn't there. So the target is to increase the number of mentors. Recognizing that there are time constraints on everybody, so there's an e-learning part to it. The training is delivered to the consultants on site. The mentor actually comes to you. And because of the challenge around, well, we have some very good facilitators, Paul O'Hara and others in the region, but his time is precious and nobody can ever get any backfill. So we've knocked that on the head, and we've brought in an international person who's bought in to support this. This is my favorite picture of Paul O'Hara delivering this, and it's the combination of the slide and his face that just cracks me up. But here he is doing the POCUS piece, and the point, is that these are the skills. You see everybody training here. Here's peripheral cannulation under ultrasound guidance. Yes, this is a good shot. This is lumbar puncture, right? So finding the spot, and you can see how realistic the simulators are. The image is almost the identical. So it's a good one for simulation. And the last piece of work that we're doing, which is massive and may resonate with some people, is, well, what is, in terms of curriculum content, where does SIM fit? And what about clinical placement? So can we use SIM to replace clinical placements? Because that's a pressure point. So I suppose the need is, well, some things can't be taught in a classroom. If you think about some of the skills like prescribing, you think about decision-making, situation awareness, working in a team, acute care, you can't teach those in a classroom. And even on clinical practice, clinical placement, they're very hard to teach. And we have an awful lot of people we have to teach, so there's pressure. So what we're trying to do is to understand which pieces of the curriculum we can carve out that are best delivered by SIM, and then translate that into, could this, if it was of a high standard, replace clinical placement? The answer is of course, but we need enough resources and we need enough faculty trained to do it. So the sort of targets are that preparedness for practice, that clinical immersion. Can you simulate that and get people up to speed? Very similar to the VEMS approach we're taking with the IMGs. Targeting patient safety specifically as a curriculum content and the pieces around it, which would include risk and quality improvement, reporting error, situation awareness and decision making and leadership. And then targeting maybe specific clinical skills. So again, in the postgraduate setting, I'm quite interested that I see curricula that have things like leadership, decision making, speaking up, working under stress there as competencies, but I'm not sure how they're being taught, and certainly not sure how they're being assessed. So that's kind of where simulation, I think, fits. So the National Simulation Office is in place now 2.5 years, coming up to 3. And the national strategy was launched in December 2025 and adopted by senior leadership team at HSE as a strategy for the HSE. And that's the vision, and it's about change and learning from each other and the transformation of healthcare and a direct impact on patient safety and the quality of care. And I'm really struck by how similar that is to the blurb about what the REACH network is trying to do. The words are the same. So I think that there is a very strong link. And there's 10 strategic objectives, and really, what's relevant to this group is that number 4, 7, and 8 about capacity in the learning environment. The HSE National Simulation Office to support that in terms of expertise and helping to develop these large-scale programs that are meeting a need and setting policies and standards. I suppose there are some enablers of it. The office is in a good position because it's funded and staffed by members from all professions. So nursing, HSCP, NDTP, QPS are all contributing to the funding of any of the projects. And by the end of this year, we will have 4 fellows from each of the professions and 1 from CHI. That to me signifies there's a willingness and a buy-in. And there is agreement that on the national strategy, it was agreed by all professions. And there's agreement on the first big block of it, which is to put in regional leadership to support all professions in simulation. So I hope that kind of helps. I don't know, Michelle, if it does or not, but thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Dara. I think that was a really excellent overview of kind of the SIM, and I think some of us have a very traditional view of SIM, and I think it's evolved so much over the last number of years, thanks in no small part to your own contribution. I'd like to open the floor up to questions here. If anyone wants to ask a question, either ask it or stick up your hand or put it in the chat. Very quiet today.
Could I ask a question, if that's okay?
Sure, go for it, Kate.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much. Great presentation. My name is Kate Roach. I'm a GP and I'm a fellow in remote and rural medicine. I just really wanted to know how we could get involved, how we can get some kind of training in simulation, which would be amazing to do. I worked in rural Canada for 5 years, and we used to do, so the helicopter service would come out called Stars, and they'd set up at the back of an ambulance basically and run simulations for 2 days, all the common kind of emergency stuff that would come in. But I found it absolutely excellent. But if we could get any kind of training in that, that would be fantastic. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a great one, and you're on the money in terms of how do we do it. So we are trying to work with the ICGP at the moment. So that kind of started with Rob and the new curriculum, and we said, okay, that's an opportunity to put SIM in somewhere, and can we have a look at it? So now we're working with Kathy Murray to think about how that might work. And I think the kind of acute emergency space is something that people come back with again and again to say, like, we probably need a bit more training in that. Now, Gary Lydon runs a course, I think, up in Tala that deals with that. But I do think that we could scale that. And, we're thinking about using that VEMS model just to get people's skills, keep on top of their skills in a simple way using SIM. And then also to extend it out into the conversation afterwards. Who needs prophylactic antibiotics? How do I talk to the school if they ring? What happens to my staff? So we could develop these very nice programs that will be deliverable within each GP practice, I think, as well as ICGP. The challenge is, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, how do you get training in it? And I think that's the first step that we have to do. Is it's not hard. It's just understanding it and sort of simplifying it. So I think we've agreed with Kathy and the ICGP that the first thing would be maybe to pilot a program and to use that to start bringing in some faculty development. The good news is that the National Simulation Office is finishing an e-learning program on HSE land, which is short. So that's good. And it's very it's easy. And then there's a workshop associated with it. So I think there is kind of generic stuff coming, but I think you're 100% right. We need to go in and say everybody needs to have a little bit of this, and we need to pick what we want to do, what's the need, and let's just get on with it.
Dara, can I ask, is that e-learning program on HSE a generic sim kind of training kind of idea, or how? Just give us a little bit more about that, maybe.
So it'll be launched on HSE land at the end of this year. It's open to everybody. It is not to turn you into a simulationist or a sim lunatic or anything like that. It's really for, I suppose, it's designed for, faculty, clinical educators, and who find themselves using sim with very little guidance. And so it's 8 very short modules, probably about an hour and 10 minutes in total. You don't have to do any of them, or there's no, you can go in and pick what you want. It gives you an overview, but if you are interested, there's a 2-day workshop. You have to have completed all 8, and then you sign up for the workshop, and it does a little bit of debriefing and a bit about program design. And so it's available to everybody. Now, I was saying up until about 3 weeks ago that anybody could use it because HSE land is open to everybody, but they've changed their permissions now, and HSE, they've locked people out. So we're in conversation with them because I think the universities and the postgraduate training bodies should have access to this. So it's I suppose it's a good launching place. If you find yourself being asked to come to sim and you haven't a clue what's going on, it's very useful. Yeah.
Any other questions coming up? I have one, but I'll hold it now in case anyone else is keen to ask something.
Hi, sorry, my name is Julie Higgins. I work for the HSC West. I'm a midwife, and I work community and hospital based. So I've been at simulations, and I think it's a very modern version of a very old-fashioned way of learning through talking through a situation. But I really do love the multidisciplinary team approach to it because everybody learns. It's fascinating how much you can learn from other discipline, and there's such an enormous value in that for all disciplines.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think it is, if we can get that conversation going. It's not about the equipment or the technology, and so really the investment is in the facilitator. If you have a good debriefer, a good facilitator, all you need is a teddy, not even a teddy, a picture of a teddy. And that's, and so that VEMS with some facilitator guides and a bit of training, it would get people talking, and that's really what it's about.
Excellent. I agree with that. I think the multidisciplinary ethos, and everyone in the room is valued, their opinion is valued, and it's a comfortable space to kind of feedback, and it kind of probes things that maybe traditional settings or that kind of. It was interesting when you were speaking. I'll come to you, Lisa. I see your hand up there. I think sometimes the learning is in the discomfort. Certainly, we were setting up our integrated care program. We did that sim where we went through things, and I was like, "Oh, dude, that's not actually working. We're not communicating there." But you kind of get the learning through those things, and it is an opportunity for self-reflection or program reflection. Lisa, do you want to come in on your question? Thanks.
Yes. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Dara, as well for the very informative presentation. I just had I wanted to ask you about the input process, output paper. I suppose everybody's at different stages, and for me, I suppose where the team is trying to develop and progress the interdisciplinary sims that we have. And we start with cardiac arrest and a psychosis scenario with the GP hospital group and undergraduate mental health nursing students. But I wonder, Dara, would you have advice on how to, I suppose, start a discussion of, I suppose, focusing on the need, where I suppose where to ask the questions, I suppose, to try and decide where do we go next, because we could just pick one. We could, and again, I smile when you said about the learning outcomes. That's what we did. We aligned them to our modules. But of course, as we develop, we're getting a bit more complex. And I suppose the work that goes, I want to make sure that it's relevant and meaningful for everybody involved. So if you had any advice for us, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Lisa, is this at undergraduate level or hospital level?
Yes, undergrad.
Yeah.
We have a postgrad as well, but I suppose I'm involved in both, but we're focusing on the undergrad at the moment for the interprofessional. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, they're slightly different, I suppose, in the approach, but we're having these conversations with almost every school, nursing, midwifery, physio, you name it, how do we start? What do we pick? And there's sort of two approaches. One is to look at your curriculum. I mean, provided your curriculum is reasonably up to date, and either I take pieces of it that really are pressure points, and we define those by thinking about, well, when this student who I'm responsible for starts work, are they really able to do that? Are they really able to do that? And I spoke to somebody from a physio tutor yesterday who, they're going through the motions of teaching X, Y, and Z, but really when the physio goes into the ED or the hospital on their first day, they're absolutely not prepared. So it's that kind of immersive piece, speaking to other professions, dealing with complexity, those kind of things that you actually can't teach. And that's your duty to. So a lot of the undergraduate program, most people come in at the preparedness for practice piece, whatever that means to you. And I know in nursing, and my nursing fellow, she's not, I don't know if Claire's on, the medication piece is a big one. It's very hard to teach that. And yet, so that may be a place to come in. So you need to find the pressure point that translates into practice. And the interprofessional piece, it will be in there because they're usually the most complex piece, so that would be my recommendation, that you go back and have a look at the curriculum and ask yourself, are students prepared for practice? If not, what are they not prepared in? And why is that? And the answer would be because it's hard to do it. I mean, medical students don't come out of medical school able to prescribe, but yet they're expected to, because it's hard, you can't teach it. You can teach it, but you can't do it. So same fits in there. So you can send me an email, Lisa, and I might have a chat with you about it because it's a bit long-winded.
Thanks, Dara. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Brilliant. I see there's a question in the chat from Mairead there. Hi, Mairead. Super presentation, Dara, but you mentioned multi-professional when talking about teams. Is there a reason you use that term rather than multidisciplinary? I think there's lots of terms for interprofessional, multi-professional, those kind of things. So it can get... Yeah.
It causes a lot of, I'm always fascinated by it. The term, people get very hot under the collar about it. So the professions are nursing, midwifery, medicine, etc. And that's what I'm trying to work across, is those professions. You can have a multidisciplinary team that is all the same profession. And in fact, we're very good in medicine in doing that. We love to have an MDT, but it's full of doctors. That's not interprofessional. So it's a bit of both, and multi-professional is another one that we've been using as well. They all mean something slightly different. I think, it's really important to have people from different professions in the room, not just different disciplines, because that's a different lens on the kaleidoscope. And so I have a tendency to flip back and forward, I suppose. But, the strategy is written as interprofessional. And I like to stay away from the discipline completely.
Right. I might throw in my question now if no one else is there, but I'm just keen. I was thinking back, Dara, we set up an integrated care program here in Galway, and I was thinking about what you said about the reactivity of the HSE. Sometimes, we do something, we don't, we kind of react to something and we get it done. Have you been involved within the role, or has SIM been thought of in terms of the initial setup of programs? Because we throw out all these programs and then we find the problems when we're actually doing them rather than doing it the other way around. And I'm just wondering if that's come into your remit at all. I know there's a lot to do otherwise, but like it's an interesting part, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's the double diamond. And so, with the national clinical programs, I think there's 32 of them under review.
There, maybe. Yeah.
And they have a remit around what you call program design and new protocols and things. And I mean, I'm always talking to them saying, can you just think about this and sim it before you launch this national. It's hard to get people to think like that. But the fact that the penny has dropped with you is, and you don't have to have all the bells and whistles and be in a simulator. You can sit around a tabletop, provided you have a good facilitator or a VEMS, and say, okay, if this patient was to go here, would that work? So I think we want people to come to us and say, give us a hand. Now, the 4Ms and the age-friendly health system, they've come and they're starting to design an education framework, and we have a foot in that door. But you're 100% right. Think about it before you go launching into change.
I just think a business wouldn't do it that way. They do all their homework beforehand, and this is a tool maybe that they could actually, use.
It's mind-boggling to people in business how we do business.
Yeah.
And the waste of money. But look, it's not that easy. I mean, it's complex. But I think if you can use SIM to understand the complexity and where the pressure point is, and just listen to what some of the other people are saying, it's quite eye-opening. And sometimes the solution is much simpler than you thought,
Absolutely. Well, on that very positive note, I better wrap up because we pride ourselves on trying to get done by 2:00 on this, because we know people are dipping in during lunchtime. If there's no other questions or anything like that, we might draw the session to a close, and really, really thank Dara for a really thought-provoking talk. And thanks to everyone who's contributed with their questions. I would encourage you to fill out the feedback, please. It's really valuable to us, particularly for planning our next few sessions. And thanks again for attending and becoming part of our Reach Network, because I think it's a really valuable forum, and we're delighted with people's engagement so far. All right.
Bye, Michelle. Bye.
Thanks, Dara. Thanks.